right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to engage in this conversation about wellness, Mr. District Attorney Jared Williams. Congratulations. I don't think that I have seen you. I have not. I have not seen you since you became district attorney.
Well, the world was kind of shut down during that time, so we were
Yes.
restricted in travel and
Yes, it was
shelter in
officially
place.
January 2021 when you assumed office.
That's right.
Okay, great, great. Well, as I said, this is we'll be engaging in a conversation about professional wellness, and I know that, as I said, you're a district attorney of the Augusta Circuit, first Black district attorney, and licensed to practice law in several states. Grew up, born and raised in Augusta, Georgia. What else should we, the listeners, know about
Since it's a wellness conversation and a professional
you?
chat, I would say do as I say, not as I do.
Okay.
I'm here to learn as much as I am anything else.
Mhm. What have these last few years been like for you as a district attorney, and what has that transition been like? Yeah, over the last few years.
It has been challenging, rewarding, heartbreaking at times. It's been really run the gamut of all the emotions. And typically I have, you go through the emotional gamut every day, depending on what's going on. It's definitely been a time of growth, personally, professionally, spiritually, just out of necessity due to the demands of the job.
Okay. What does a typical day look like for a district attorney?
Well, that's the rub. There is no typical day. You start out expecting one thing, and then you might get a phone call. So for instance, you're always on, 24/7, you're on call, so to speak. And so I had finally gotten a Saturday that I had some time to relax. My fiance was out doing something, and I was just gonna lay on the couch and do nothing.
Hmm.
And then I got a phone call that one of our deputies had been shot and was in critical condition. And well, now I'm getting dressed and I'm heading to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is no typical day. And that's probably been one of the biggest challenges is that in every job I've ever had, I've always been able to hit some level of where you understand everything to the point that you can just go on autopilot and kind of whatever changes you just roll with them. Um,
Hmm.
in this job, there's no such thing as autopilot. There's absolutely 100% focus at all times, and that can be draining and exhausting.
Okay. So how do you implement balance, wellness with the needs? Because what you just described is something that I think is not what the image or the understanding is of a district attorney, of going to the hospital and being there in all of those different ways that is different than what someone may expect of a district attorney. So, what does balance and the implementation of wellness look like for you?
Well, one of the biggest pieces that has helped me achieve that balance is my partner, my fiance. She
Hmm.
um, that was she came into my life at a time when I had zero balance. It was work all
Okay.
the time, and so she's been pretty deft at finding ways to get me out of kind of the workspace and into whether it's taking a trip or just going and having a nice dinner, whatever it might be.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but that's you can't really depend on another person to help you get your balance. And so that kind of taught me about setting boundaries and kind of reading
Mhm.
myself well enough to know that I'm an introvert by nature. And so while I enjoy people, and most people would probably think of me as an extrovert, I don't get energy from that. I get energy
Okay.
from spending time alone, spending time with myself, whether it's playing video games or writing, reading. I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, uh,
Mhm.
you know, making time for that. And so, depending on the different seasons that I've had, in the past 3 years, that's looked a little differently. For a while, I was taking walks pretty regularly. Um, for a while, I was fencing, which is a
Oh.
wonderful sport that I enjoyed quite a lot. That got to a point where I needed those evenings that I was devoting to that. And so I had to shift again. Uh,
Mhm.
so it kind of takes the shape of what it needs to get me through whatever I'm going through at a particular time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that regarding shifting and the ability to notice when something that was a helpful coping skill has become unhelpful, or not necessarily unhelpful, but being able to discern. Yeah, this actually is taking up more time, and this is time that I actually need for myself, or I need to devote this time in a different way. And that's important because something that can be helpful at one point can shift and not be as helpful or what you need at that time. When in regards to wellness, especially as professional, when was or what was a time in which you realized that you weren't well, or you needed to implement some of these things? What were those indications for you?
So I recognized that I had some kind of emotional baggage from the job that was, impacting the way that I dealt with people in my personal life. I mean, and
Hmm.
so the job is kind of isolating in a way. It's like you're surrounded by people all the time. People are pulling from you all the time.
Hmm.
But in that same way, it's very isolating, and it's very, you feel like you're on an island, and that very few people
Okay.
understand what you are going through or the decisions that you have to make and be faced with every day. And so um, with that, it was really recognizing that I was withdrawing from the people who love me and were trying to support me. Um,
Hmm.
and I reached out, and the State Bar of Georgia does a really good job. They have a program called Use Your Six, and they give you 6 free sessions of counseling at a counselor of your choice. And that was really helpful. And so I encourage my attorneys to do that, because what people don't think about with our job, they think of, law and order, going into court,
Hmm.
trying the cases, and we do that. But for every case that we're trying, we're also hearing the stories of the victims, some of the worst moments of their lives, or the victim's family, if the victim that has died as a result of the crime, and you're taking on all of that trauma, and you're taking on all of that pain and that anguish that some of these families are going through. And so you add that with the stress of the demands of the courtroom, and the requirement that you divorce yourself from the emotion long enough to appropriately adjudicate your case.
Hmm.
And so our attorneys are balancing all of this. And so I take that. I have less of the courtroom duties now, but I also have uh, about 60 people who work for me, and who I want to help get where they need to go professionally and in life. And then I have the whole community's worth of people and their problems that they bring to me on the political side. So um, it's all about um, kind of listening to myself, I'm really bad at that. It's just had a doctor tell me that. Um, but also, just relying on the supports that you do have.
Mhm. That's all really great, that you shared that and those different aspects of the job. Because one of the reasons why I wanted to really focus on professional wellness is that I noticed with campaigns and as a professional, you can take on the weight of the responsibility of the heaviness of your job, the expectations, and all of that, and not fully have that balance or not make sure that you're taking that time for yourself. Because, as you mentioned, you're hearing these accounts, these experiences from victims, from their families, and also from the community. And it's not always considered the weight that that has on the person who's hearing it. And so it's so important that, like you mentioned, utilizing those 6 sessions and more if needed to get in touch with yourself to figure out, okay, how is this impacting me? Sometimes things bring up different things for the person who's hearing them. I worked as a forensic interviewer for some years at a child advocacy center. And one of the best things that was, I always say that was one of my best jobs. And we worked, we had our MDT, multidisciplinary team, and we really were able to support each other. And you had everyone at the table. And when detectives would come in and when lawyers would come in, we were able to understand the stressors that this had on all of us. And so hearing those different accounts and just the strain that it could have on you personally, and how you may show that with your family and your loved ones. But having that support is so important. And also acknowledging and recognizing, whew, today was a long day. I need to
Right.
decompress. I need to decompress. And how wonderful that you have your fiance there as that support and as that person to help you with that balance. What do you feel helped you utilize those 6 sessions? Has there ever been this idea that, okay, you shouldn't, or you should just be able to hear this and just manage this and just, go home and just keep going?
I mean, I spent the first 30 some odd years of my life feeling like I should handle it on my own. And so I just, I was wrong in thinking that way, but I had the type of life where I could get away with it. Whereas
Mm,
now, just the demands that I have throughout all aspects of life, it's not just professionally, it's also personally and familially. I'm getting older, and therefore my parents are getting older, and
mhm,
the struggles that come along with that. Um, all those things demand more of me, and so if I want to be who I need to be, I have to
mhm.
reach out and use every tool that I have at my disposal.
Yeah. So, what are some tips that you would give to maybe attorneys early in their career regarding balance or uh, making sure that they're utilizing different support systems early on?
I'll tell you, the younger attorneys typically are better at this than
Mm,
the attorneys in my generation and older, um,
okay.
because they've grown up with a more normalized culture and atmosphere around therapy, around mental health and wellness. Um,
Mhm,
whereas my generation, and certainly anybody older than me, it was always toughen up, you know, grind
mhm,
through it, persevere,
mhm,
whatever it may be. A lot of those terms really are just used as a hey, shut up and stop complaining and just do your work. And so there are a lot of unhealthy people because they never recognized that mental health is just as important as physical health. And that
mhm.
in the ways that you must train your body if you want to be physically fit, you have to train your mind to be mentally fit.
Yeah.
Um, it's not about being smart or being tough or any of that. it's about being healthy. And I don't think many people really thought like that for a long time. And many people still don't. But I'm
Hmm.
encouraged that there are more people willing to have that conversation now. And so to young people coming up, I would say listen to your peers who are telling you that it might be it's never easy, right? Because even though you have less responsibility as a young attorney, um, you certainly have less experience too, and so there's a stress that comes with that.
Hmm.
Um, there's no part of your career that's easy at the time that you're in it, and so building up those good habits and those good practices now will set you up for success later. It will allow you to be a better business person if you start your own firm. It will allow you to be a better um, husband or wife if you um, if you learn how to manage your stressors the best way. Certainly, it'll make you a better parent if you're not bringing your vicarious trauma from the job into
Hmm.
your home life.
Yes. All of those are such excellent points. And it sounds like you are modeling that healthy um, implementation of wellness and making sure that you're checking for wellness for your staff as well and for your family.
Yeah, I wouldn't give myself so much credit as a model of it, but certainly I understand there's a need for it.
Hmm. Well, and I hear what you're saying, but I'm gonna push back. When you are engaging in activities of relaxation, even if there should be more, but that is sending a signal to other people. Okay, if DA Williams is doing this, then maybe I can carve out some time to do this as well, and encouraging and reminding yourself to make sure that you are continuously checking in with yourself, following doctor's orders, listening to your body, and practicing wellness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Is there anything else that you feel would be important to share regarding wellness as a professional?
You know, one piece that I haven't really talked about, but that has been a big help to me, is really two-tiered. One is that I can't be the person, the professional, the leader that I want to be if I'm not spiritually right, and if I haven't
Mm-hmm.
done the work of kind of being disciplined about growing closer to God. And so for me, that's really helpful. And it also helps because it's a time of my day where I turn everything off and I focus on prayer and meditation and reading scripture. And that's just helpful in and of itself, but it certainly is in helping me grow into who I want to be. But then the piece I had, I'm mentoring a young guy in college right now, and he was at my office last week and he said something that was so brilliant to me. He said, some people confuse spiritual health for mental health. And so just because you are doing well and you're having your quiet time and your devotions or whatever it may be, and you're feeling good in that way, doesn't mean that you don't have more work to do to make sure that you have the type of emotional and mental health that allows you to practice your faith the way that you want to.
That is such a great point. That is really, really good. I shared with a guest a few weeks ago while when I was attending a church in the DC area, the pastor, and it was so impactful. I loved everything that they offered there. They had AA groups, and he talked about how he attended therapy, and he talked about while it was Sunday was such a high moment to preach from the pulpit and the call and response. And this is a church where they had 3 services, and the president of the United States would attend this service, and or this church. And he talked about how being a pastor did not substitute for also making sure that he was well with his mental health. He talked about being diagnosed with depression and going and talking to a therapist, and that it was okay. And so that wasn't, it wasn't excluding anything. It's, listen, I get this from church as a pastor, and I also need to make sure that I am mentally well by going and talking to a therapist. And
Right.
that's so important.
We have these automatic lights, so my lights just went. They think I'm asleep, so I'm a wave and try and maybe they come back on. Uh, but absolutely, and you can't really lead people if you're not
Mhm.
well yourself. You can't give to others what you don't have for yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I know in my program, graduate program, for counseling, it was recommended that we have our own therapist, because as therapists, you have to make sure that you are well, that you are checking in. And I've had different therapists during times, to make sure that I am emotionally well, to be the best therapist that I can be for my clients.
Let me ask you this.
Mhm.
Why do you think, is there any logic or benefit in having therapists be licensed locally as opposed to being able to practice anywhere in the US, especially as we move more to telehealth? I
Mhm.
was very surprised to find that if I wanted a therapist across the river, I couldn't necessarily, engage that person's
Mhm.
services. It seems odd to me. I understand why you wouldn't want lawyers just practice across the board, right? Because the laws
Mhm.
are different, but the principles of therapy, I wouldn't think are.
No, they aren't. They aren't really. I am licensed and certified to see individuals in 4 states, and the you just need to be aware of the services that may be needed for someone in those different states. So, if someone is possibly suicidal, then you want to make sure that you readily have the number for the local emergency services. But I think that it is helpful, and I think with COVID and the pandemic, um, it became even more, what's the word? It was not uncommon for someone to see individuals in multiple states, in various states, and for a variety of reasons why the person who resides in a state may want to see someone in a different setting. So, for example, as we've been talking about professional wellness, and especially when you are in a high profile career
Bingo.
position, you may not want to see someone who is local, who it's okay, wait a minute, we may end up at the same dinner. Now, as a therapist, we do pledge confidentiality in the certain situations to break that confidentiality, like suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, harm to a child. But but it still may be awkward to be in the same space. I've had that happen as a therapist, and having my therapist in the same room for training. And it's like, oh, this is a little weird. So that's, in those situations, it can make you feel more comfortable to receive services from someone that you won't, that the likelihood of you running into them in the grocery store is less, or the
Right.
likelihood of them being connected, married, or best friends, or whatever, with someone that you know, is less. So I think it is helpful, and it's beneficial, and it gives you the option to seek support from someone who is not in your circle.
As I'm talking through this with people in my office, or anyone that I can encourage to seek help, what are the what should someone be expecting for counseling? Like what are reasonable expectations that are kind of baseline
Mm.
for a good, competent counselor?
Well, it a lot of it depends on what you're looking for. So having your specific goals in mind. And whenever I do my consultation, sometimes individuals come to me, they have their question. They are very well prepared. And you can ask those questions regarding like if there is a concern for a professional and it's, hey, you know what? I don't mind people knowing that I go to therapy, but I don't necessarily want them to know who my therapist is. You can ask them about how do they engage if they run into a client. You can also ask them what their theoretical orientation is. What has guided them into therapy? Trying to think some of the other questions clients have asked me. I've had clients ask me some questions that aren't really applicable to therapy. Um, how many years that person has been practicing? What is it? What are some things that they've learned and they found helpful as a therapist? So those are some of the basic questions. How long they've been practicing, and yeah, what if they specialize in what you want to address? So you have counselors who specialize in grief, but if you are going for marital counseling or premarital counseling, that may not be the best person.
Right.
So,
Depends
and
on what
also
your depends on
exactly
your marriage.
what you want to exactly what you want to address, and making sure that the person that you're seeing, that this is something that they have specific experience addressing. Because while all therapists, yeah, all of us should. We've received training to address a lot of issues. There still are certain areas, like for example, for disordered eating. That's not my specialty. But when it comes to trauma and anxiety, those are my specialty areas. Now, with that, there may be disordered eating that has come from those things, and we can still address the root of the issue. So
Right.
it's really knowing, okay, this is what my goal is for counseling, talking with in my consultation with the counselor and seeing if they have experience addressing this specific issue.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thank you for answering my questions.
No problem. Thank Those are great questions. Really great questions because it's just like a doctor. When you go to one doctor, you may feel as though, wait a minute, I don't know if this doctor is fully addressing my concerns, or I don't like their bedside manner. I don't like the way in which, their dismissiveness or X, Y, and Z. That doesn't mean that we don't go to the doctor again. It means that you find a new doctor. And what can happen in therapy is someone may have a not so good experience with a therapist, and they may feel as though, well, therapy just isn't for me. No, it means that that therapist wasn't, you weren't the best fit. And then do check-ins. I like to do check-ins with my clients and ask them, or after our consultations, I'll ask them, hey, based on these things that are shared, do you feel as though we'll be a good fit? Or if I feel as though we're not a good fit, I'll let them know. I don't think that we would be a good fit, and therefore that would be a disservice for you, for
Yeah.
us continuing on in counseling.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here and engaging in this really, really important discussion about being well as a professional. And with all of the accolades and all of the firsts that you bring to this role, I feel as though the Augusta, Burke County, Richmond County, they're in good hands.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I thank you for shining a light on these issues and making sure that people are out there seeking the help that they need.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's wellness session. Continue to be well. Bye.
Take care.